Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our next panel that my friend Professor Chris Hughes from the University of Warwick is going to chair. Professor Hughes has to leave pretty punctually at 2:30, so we're not going to run on. But anyway, over to you, Chris.
Thank you, John. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm Chris Hughes from the University of Warwick. So we're on to panel 2, where you may have seen the programme, but I think in line with the project, even though some of the previous panels started inevitably looking at some of these questions about the future of trilateralism, this panel is going to focus a little bit more on some of those future questions about trilateralism, how durable is it? How do we avoid some of the sort of false starts that we've seen in the past for US-Japan ROK relations? And of course, there's lots of things that we've already talked about in terms of leadership turnover. Do interests always converge? And one of the things that we didn't hear too much about today, but and I wonder if some of the cracks have been papered over a little bit, issues of history actually. And public opinion. I often hear those are resolved or they're sort of shelved, but still they're there in order to trip up, I think, some of the trilateral dynamics. You do have, I think you may have the programme, so I won't do long introductions for the 4 speakers and the discussant we have, 3 speakers and the discussant we have today. But just going down the table, I have Kyu-Young Chung, who is Associate Professor of Political Science at Kangwon National University and also non-resident fellow at the ASEAN Policy Institute. Next, Jeffrey Hornung, who is Japan lead for RAND's National Security Division and senior political scientist at RAND. And then our last main speaker is Professor Yuichi Hosoya, who is Professor of International Politics at Keio University and also Managing Director and Research Director at the Asia Pacific Initiative. And then our discussant today is Professor Ji-Wook Shin, who is Professor of Contemporary Korea in Sociology Department at Stanford University, but also Senior Fellow at Stanford's Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. So a really excellent lineup of speakers today. We're going to follow basically the same pattern as we did in the first panel. 10 minutes each to our main speakers. And they can pick up on some of the really interesting questions that I think John posed for the panelists, but also may have come up earlier in the panel. Then we'll have 10 minutes of discussion, and then we'll go into Q&A, inviting the speakers to respond to some of the discussion, but then also hopefully opening up to the floor for as much time as possible. So, without further ado.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for Cambridge to invite this prestigious events. Today I'll talk about, as layout, there's many questions actually in the program, but I'll try to answer all of them to my best. So as many panelists in the previous session talked about the achievement of trilateral cooperations, but from South Korea's perspective, there are many actually. This trilateral cooperation has been started from the TCOC cooperations to respond North Korea's nuclear threats. But at the same time, in the context of Japan and South Korea relations, TISA, trilateral inter-sharing arrangement, has been very significant in the sense that it is kind of offsetting all the historical disputes and and focus more on strategic interests and to be aligned to focus on North Korea issue and GSOMIA as well as in that regard as well. And many panelists also emphasize this Camp David Accord, spirit of Camp David principles, commitment, concern. But this process shows that this trilateral cooperation has been evolved from the threat-based cooperation to interest-based cooperation to encompass in the Indo-Pacific issue as well. And that is actually possible, to my knowledge, because Yoon administrations and its attempt to resolve this historical issue kind of focus more on strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific, in the sense that by providing this global pivotal state kind of vision, which has been lasted very short time, but at the same time, that shows how South Korea can move beyond Korean Peninsula. So that being said, the current challenges focus on the questions that I've been laid out. The challenges actually depends on political leadership. Actually, many panelists discussed that briefly in the previous session, but the major challenge is the leadership changes and how those leadership actually perceive this geopolitical contestation in the Indo-Pacific, and how they prioritize those threats by their national interest. So let's take one by one. First, from the Lee administration, as many of you already know, that his foreign policy initiatives based on practical diplomacy, which is a kind of I suggested as a way of criticizing Yoon administration's value-based diplomacy, because that their understanding is that this value-based diplomacy has been make for South Korea's foreign policy more rigid. In other words, less flexible. Focus more on U.S. South Korea-Japan alliances rather than isolated China, Russia, and North Korea. So that's the kind of their basic assumptions about making foreign policy in the next 5 years. So in that sense, prioritization is North Korea issue, of course. Not only denuclearization, but also kind of interchange with people-to-people interchanges, as well as economic developments or other confidence-building measures in North Korea. And to that end, South Korea is willing to have a better relationship with Russia and China as well, as a way of, as many progressive government has been done, kind of having a better relationship with China will kind of facilitate its dialogue with North Korea. Or in the long run, in the long term, it will kind of improve its U.S.-North Korea dialogue as well. So that's their basic assumption. In that sense, that kind of prioritize all the foreign policy initiative in Russia and China and other countries as well. So the thing is that how that is actually reconciled with South Korea's relationship with NATO countries and European allies, Ukraine crisis or even Middle East crisis, how that is actually reconciled with those crises and how that is kind of countervailing the previous foreign policy under the Yoon administration. That's the question to be discussed in the later. But as you can see, the Lee administration's foreign policy is in the making at this moment. So we will see and need to discuss and communicate with other partners in the future as well. And from South Korea's perspective, Trump is also, as many already agreed, is another challenges in conducting trilateral cooperations. The main question South Korea has is that what's the end state of U.S.-China competition in the end? Because what we saw from South Korea's perspective is that U.S. and China seems to be in a great power library, but at the same time, Trump is kind of making appeasement movement when it comes to negotiations at the expense of allies, kind of trade deals. So that's a kind of question and paradox that allies and partners have against the United States, and whether it will maintain this rivalry situations or more like a division of influence kind of situation, that's remained to be seen. And that's actually making a kind of uncertainty in the maintaining trilateral cooperation from South Korea's perspective. And also many other panelists actually mentions about Elbridge Colby kind of defense policy. There has been many kind of reservations about United States' future national defense strategy report, especially because of Elbridge Colby, and there is another report by Caldwell. In the sense that United States have two different island chain kind of postures. All the strategic assets stand up force as strategic asset will be moved outside second island chain. That kind of discourse actually raised questions whether United States is delegating deterrence to allies and moving back to offshore balancer. It might help crisis stability in the Indo-Pacific, but at the same time, it will kind of weaken the kind of increase the vulnerability of the allies' deterrence in the East Asia region. So that's one thing that South Korea has for United States when it comes to trilateral cooperation. Because anyway, trilateral cooperation is not only for the North Korea but also for China as well. And regarding Japan, there's a kind of new Takaichi Sanae-sang might kind of take the office, but South Koreans understand that she is a conservative figure, and we expected the range of foreign policy she will pursue when she actually take the office. But we will see. We are in the kind of wait and see kind of mode at this moment. So, given that all of this combination of three leaders' perception and priorities, I guess cooperation on North Korea is likely to remain, but when it comes to like security cooperation or defense cooperation, which has been very strengthened during the Yoon administration, to the extent of like a trilateral cooperation, like a Freedom Edge Air Force exercises, or Japan and South Korea even coordinated on civilian evacuation operation in the Middle East. So that kind of cooperations in and outside the Indo-Pacific might be moderated in the future. And also, South Korea's one thing I have to mention is that when South Korea actually faces this trade negotiation, I think every country has been faces same situation in especially those allies in the East Asia. But that kind of trade negotiation actually narrowed the negotiation space for South Korea in the domestic level. Even though South Korea wanted to cooperate in the trilateral, bilateral, or multilateral way, that kind of U.S. Position has been actually negate South Korea's leadership's kind of maneuverability in the domestic level. So that leading up to actually discussion on public opinion, I will end up here after I discuss this. So when it comes to public opinion about trilateral cooperation, my understanding is that there's two different layers of public opinion. At the kind of public level, the overwhelming proportion of South Korea public has kind of anti-China kind of sentiments. Not only about this economic coercion, but there's a maritime coercion and people-to-people kind of issue, also crime in the South Korean territory. So there are many issues that actually resonate anti-China sentiment, and of course anti-North Korea sentiment as well. But at the elite level, there is a kind of disproportionate public opinion fragmentations. When you look at South Korea's Congress, the majority is the progressive parties, but they have like a more engaging kind of attitude toward China. So there's two different layers, and how that will be sustainable in the future might be tested in the general election next year. So we will see. But you might want to kind of remember that not all South Koreans have the similar kind of public opinion distribution as in the elite level as well. So I'll stop here. We'll discuss more.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Great timing.
Yes, thank you. First, thank University of Cambridge for this. John, thank you so much for being the convener and bringing everyone together, as well as your staff for everything that they've done. What I'm going to talk about today, I should say up front, these are my personal opinions. They do not represent RAND. They do not represent RAND sponsors. So these are my personal opinions. We received a number of questions, and I'm going to focus on a few things, trying to look at the future of trilateralism, and maybe some of the things I don't respond to we can get to in Q&A. But let me start by saying that, and it's already been said, it's self-evident that the Camp David Summit, the documents that come from this, this really represented a concerted effort by the three countries to cooperate trilaterally in a way that we hadn't seen before. As Dr. Yoon noted in his remarks this morning, just the broad range of issues that they agreed to in terms of military affairs, economic security, technology, people-to-people exchanges, global health, consultations, ballistic missile defense. I mean, this is just, it's fascinating to see how much they came to given how much had not happened prior. So collectively, they agreed to a lot 2 years ago. but it's unclear how much of that spirit remains today. Because as we heard this morning, we have had changes of leadership in all three countries. I know a lot of the attention has been focused on my country, but there has been changes in all three countries, and those changes put a damper on forward momentum and the promise of trilateralism, the promise of what we were expecting to come from that. But again, let's remember that, again, what we heard this morning, it took individual leaders to show tremendous political courage. And I'm talking here particularly about President Yoon, but also Prime Minister Kishida, to put aside historical issues and focus on the forward direction of their security. This in turn opened up new opportunities for trilateral cooperation that the U.S. was able to leverage because of the courage that these two leaders showed, and that culminated in the historic Camp David. You know, while the rhetoric of trilateralism appears to remain, and we do have some positive stories of the spirit of Camp David living on, such as the launching of the Secretariat in Seoul in 2024, President Lee visiting Japan, and Prime Minister Ishiba visiting Seoul as his last visit as Prime Minister. Again, it is difficult to say that the promise of Camp David is alive and well. It has been and always will be a function of the political priorities of the three countries and the leaders of those three countries. And so changes, historically, when we look at these three countries, changes in one country has been enough to derail trilateralism. We've had changes in all three countries. So it's a very different landscape. And I'm going to get back to that issue at the end of my remarks. But let's look forward here. Assuming that trilateralism is still a common interest, and when we look to the future, I do believe that the promise of trilateralism does offer multiple benefits, even for the United States. And there are a number of specific areas that offer better opportunities than others for the three nations to try to leverage and potentially offer a roadmap of the sort that they could potentially work from. And in that regard, late last year, me and two of my RAND colleagues, we wanted to move beyond the broad contours of trilateral cooperation. We wanted to look for what are the areas that could offer specific promises of trilateral cooperation, as defined as those areas, as those countries felt where trilateralism could be the most beneficial in dealing with the security challenges they face. And so North Korea and China. And to do this, in late 2024, we met with 19 active government officials. Doesn't sound like a lot when you break it down between three countries, but still, we had government officials from all three countries. And this is across the executive. We had military defense officials, State Department, Ministry of Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Defense Department. The purpose of these meetings was to obtain insight from those in government that if they had to deal with these problems, what could potentially be very useful for them from a trilateral perspective that goes beyond economic cooperation and diplomatic cooperation. And again, we looked at the issue of North Korea vis-a-vis South Korea, and also China, with particular focus on Taiwan. So we found that there were some common elements where trilateralism may help respond. So the common elements were missile defense, ISR, logistical support, cyber defense, anti-submarine warfare, and search and rescue. Those were the areas that all three felt would be very useful. But at the same time, the specific challenges or threats posed by China and North Korea held very different needs that trilateralism could help support, and what these countries felt would be useful from their perspective. So we examined both a peacetime situation that was in crisis, as well as a contingency where a war had started. And we asked them, what do they expect trilateralism to offer? What would be best for them in these situations? And here's where I feel like the answers that we found are relevant moving forward here. So let me start first with the Korean Peninsula. A Korean Peninsula that is not yet in conflict, but it is in crisis. Respondents showed a consensus here on 3 areas in particular where they felt that trilateralism would be most valuable. The first was information sharing regarding North Korean military activity and just overall regime developments. The second was cooperation in the cyber domain, both tracking illicit cyber activity as well as countering misinformation campaigns. The third was trilateral military exercises as a way to signal deterrence so that the crisis does not escalate more. In the context of when we started to look at a wartime situation where North Korea has already started kinetic activity against the South, there was less consensus on the value of trilateralism. But the interviews uncovered 2 important things. One was that all 3 countries highlighted the difficulty of trilateral military operational cooperation on the peninsula. For Japan and Korea, both of these countries, they were in consensus that it would be very difficult for Korean leaders to allow Japanese self-defense forces on the peninsula. From the American perspective, America tended to look at a Korean contingency through the lens of its 2 bilateral alliances, that any kinetic activity would have to be dealt with through the U.S.-Japan alliance and the U.S.-ROC alliance. And so the collective result from the U.S. perspective was the response would be 2 separate efforts, and then together through these because of the respondents, we found that just nobody saw military operational cooperation as relevant. However, if there was a possibility, we pushed them and said, well, what if there was one area you really could see? They did all acknowledge that logistical support would be the one area where trilateralism could potentially help, including even Japanese and Koreans helping each other. But of course, as we heard this morning, they would need an acquisition and cross-servicing agreement for that kind of support to occur. Moving to China, in a situation where it's a crisis, but not yet conflict, the 3 countries tended to agree that it was unlikely to expect trilateral cooperation beyond diplomatic and economic cooperation. However, if trilateral cooperation were possible, again, we pushed them a little bit, they agreed that the most feasible area would be information sharing, trying to better understand what China is doing west of Japan, west of the Korean Peninsula, just trying to better understand the role, get better situational awareness. Beyond that, Japanese and American respondents tended to want more operational areas of support, such as ISR, evacuation of civilians from Taiwan, and Coast Guard cooperation. Korean respondents did not want to talk about their level of support in a Taiwan crisis. And again, this gets into a lot of the sensitivities regarding lack of diplomatic recognition. When we're considering desirable areas of trilateral cooperation in a contingency, here respondents agreed that information sharing, ISR, and anti-submarine warfare could be valuable. However, no respondent argued that trilateral military cooperation was viable in a Taiwan where China's attacking Taiwan. And again, the Americans tended to look at this through bilateral lenses with a heavy focus on the U.S.-Japan alliance, a very light focus on the U.S.-ROC alliance. So moving along and understanding, I have a couple minutes left. If these are the areas of cooperation and potential no-go areas for cooperation, let me close by saying a couple of words on challenges that I think are going to be present in the relations moving forward. I think, as Chris mentioned at the get-go, I do think historical issues always pop up. I think that's the go-to thing that people want to talk about. And and I don't doubt that. But I do think there are two other areas to emphasize that are, and we actually just heard prior to my remarks. The first is strategic priorities. All the three countries share a common interest in the peace and stability of the region. That's not in question. But they have different levels of emphasis on the key regional threats. South Korea's most immediate and significant threat has been, is, and will be North Korea. Japan and the United States focus on the long-term challenge posed by China, less so North Korea. And so if the purpose of trilateralism, and it tends to be so, is framed as responding to China, this is going to cause difficulties if the three countries do not view China in the same strategic lens as one another. The second, and this is my last point, the second challenge is domestic political instability. What I mean by that is, and again, the panels this morning were emphasizing the US, emphasizing President Trump in particular, but I do think all three countries there's a rationale to talk about all three countries because we've seen political shifts and uncertainties in all three countries that undermine the long-term stability of trilateralism. In South Korea, yes, President Yoon, his impeachment caused a lot of difficulties, but we have sometimes this shift between progressives and conservative, and their approach to Japan sometimes swings wildly from one to the other. And so that's always a issue that challenges. Japan has had its own political volatility. We've seen two short-term prime ministers intersected with one who lasted 3 years. I know a lot of folks are talking about Takaichi, but if any of you were checking your phones this morning, you saw the news that Komeito dropped out of the coalition. So Takaichi is no longer a slam dunk. And that actually offers up a new challenge of the opposition parties and who could be prime minister, with Tamaki probably being the most relevant there. And then U.S. political or policy uncertainty. We go from Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump, and you have policy whiplash. You have a lot of changes in policy that and approaches to the region that leaves allies sometimes uncertain about the direction of policy. The collective result is that with all this, the countries cannot lay out an ambitious agenda of trilateralism. It becomes challenging to have a sustained effort to try to implement trilateralism. And then again, final comment, and getting back to John's comment in his opening remarks, this all makes building trust difficult because your counterparts are constantly changing. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm Yuicho Soya, and let me repeat my thanks to John and his staff to organize this wonderful conference at a very important time. I will try to talk about the trilateral cooperation from a Japanese point of view. And actually, I prepared for that, but because of the recent news reports, I need to modify some of them. And actually, well, John gathered the world-leading scholars on the Japanese foreign policy and politics here, so many. And so I think that the international media, major medias are trying to find them, but they're all here. So if there are some difficult questions, they can answer to these difficult questions. I only answer to easy questions. I will focus on 2 points. Number one, I will talk about how will new president of the LDP, Sanae Takaichi, transform or not transform the Japan-ROK relations and the trilateral relations. Secondly, I will also focus on what are the main challenges for Japan of maintaining the trilateral cooperation? So let me start with the first question. Many are doubting perhaps Sanae Takaichi's will to continue or strengthen the trilateral cooperation. Of course, she is often regarded as quite a strong conservative politician. But at the same time, in her book, a Japanese book entitled To Defend Japan Vigorously and Affluently. She wrote a chapter on China in which she was quite critical to Chinese international behavior, but actually she didn't mention a lot about Korea. So it's difficult to find her anti-Korean attitudes. Rather than that, when she was a minister for economic security under Prime Minister Kishida, actually she was a cabinet minister under Prime Minister Kishida in promoting, of course, the Japan-ROK rapprochement. And particularly because of her role as a minister for economic security, it seems that she found the importance of Korea, because Korea has many, many advantages in several sectors, such as, of course, a semiconductor and some other important industry. At the same time, Japan and Korea share the weakness in having some of the critical minerals and those materials. So in that way, I think that during the Kishida's administration, more or less she has learned the importance of promoting further cooperation with Korea pragmatically. In that sense, I do not have particular concern over her will to further advance the cooperation between the two countries. But on the other hand, last year at the LDP's presidential election, she was seen as a quite strong revisionist and ideological conservative hawk in her foreign policy. That's why I suppose that at the last minute, Prime Minister Kishida decided to support Shigeru Ishiba rather than support Sanae Takaichi, who actually compete in the last final round. That because Prime Minister Kishida wanted to maintain his political legacy of creating or having created a very strong Japan-ROK relations. And he thought perhaps that it would be better for him to choose Shigeru Ishiba, who is quite pro-Korea, as the next prime minister after Ishiba, for the purpose of maintaining and strengthening the tie that Prime Minister Kishida actually created. In that way, I think that Prime Minister Ishiba continues his effort to further strengthen the tie between the two countries, at the same time, of course, maintaining and enhancing the security cooperation among the three countries. So I think that having learned from this lesson, Takaichi at this time, this year's LDP leadership election, she didn't present her ideological view. And she didn't mention that she would visit the Yasukuni Shrine. For the purpose of winning the LDP leadership election, she perhaps learned that she should become more centrist than before to attract a much wider vote within the LDP. And it worked, actually. So that's why she could win the election. And it is quite likely that Toshimitsu Motegi, quite a centrist, who had a very rich experience in negotiating with the United States as foreign minister in the first Trump administration. If Takaichi chooses Toshimitsu Motegi as her foreign minister, I think that she can rely on Motegi in dealing with countries such as the United States, China, and Korea. So it means that she would continue the previous policy that both Kishida and Ishiba created. But on the other hand, it is now less likely than before that Sanae Takaichi can attract the majority in the national diet, becoming prime minister. And that instead, opposition leader Tamaki Yuichiro is more likely than before to become a prime minister. And he's quite centrist and rational. And I'm sure that he can become quite a rational, strong prime minister in particularly the field of foreign policy, as long as he can have a strong political foundation, which is quite unlikely. So in that way, the weakness in that political foundation would make the next Prime Minister of Japan after Ishiba quite difficult to promote any important foreign policy directions, such as enhancing the trilateral cooperation. So in that way, I think that not because of Sanae Takaichi's ideological stance, but because of the weakness in the Japanese political foundation of the ruling party, it is more difficult for Japanese government or prime minister to present a clear idea while concerning opposition from within. Because, of course, LDP has quite strong right-wing conservative Diet members, and Sanae Takaichi really need to care about them. Otherwise, she cannot pass the legislation. So in that way, I think that any prime minister in coming years will face difficulty in promoting any foreign policy. But at the same time, I also would like to say that the Korean image of among Japanese people is actually now quite high or higher than before. And for the first time after more than 5 years, Japanese people, according to the recent opinion poll, responded that they have a positive image of Korea. 51% in Yomiuri Shimbun's opinion poll, and Nikkei Shimbun's opinion poll, 52%, that record high in the last 5 to 10 years. So in this way, I think that the Japanese people see that it is a time to further strengthen the ROK-Japan relations, because now United States is presenting a quite sometimes hostile attitude to allies, both Japan and Korea and so on. At the same time, China is becoming more powerful than before. Under the condition, it's natural for ROK and Japan to think about that closer tie between the two countries, Japan and ROK, is more needed than before. So that rational motivation, I think, would transform the ideology of both Japanese and Korean prime minister, both President Lee Jae-myung and also Prime Minister of Japan. In coming weeks, we will see who will become the next prime minister. The next question is, what are the main challenges for Japan of maintaining the trilateral cooperation? I also answer some of that question. The biggest challenge is not the ideology of Sanae Takaichi, but the weakness of the Japanese political, the ruling party's political foundation as a Kometo partner of the LDP in a coalition decides now to leave the coalition. So LDP now needs to find another partner to create a majority in the national diet. And it is quite difficult for them because opposition parties are now getting together to create a new ruling party by appointing someone who will become a next prime minister, maybe Yuichiro Tamaki, perhaps. But I would also say that Japanese politics was never so unpredictable than before, because any prime minister can be possible, and any gathering of coalition can be possible at the same time. So at this moment, it is quite difficult to predict who will become the prime minister soon. And the key to understand this is that Sanae Takaichi's flexibility, whether she can become more flexible enough to attract opposition parties, or whether she sticks to her original ideological position to promote her own ideological agenda. So it depends on her decision in coming perhaps days or weeks. So in that way, I think that domestic politics is now Japan's the most difficult question or challenge to be cleared. But in addition to that, also another difficulty comes from the United States, because the current agreement between the two sides, based upon the memorandum of understanding between the government of Japan and the government of the United States of America with respect to the strategic investment, many political parties, particular opposition party, actually criticize this agreement as an equal treaty between the two sides. That's why I'm sure that more and more there will be criticism upon that agreement. And the agreement is still very unclear. So the next prime minister and the government need to clarify the contents of the agreement which can be quite disadvantageous to Japanese economy. But at the same time, we now understand that a strong U.S.-Japan alliance is more necessary than before. That's why maybe the next prime minister need to balance the two necessities. On one hand, a Japanese prime minister and the government needs to stick to strengthening the Japanese economy, but at the same time, it is more necessary than before for seeing the stronger China to strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliance. In this way, I think that I'm quite positive about the trilateral cooperation as long as Japan can create a strong political foundation. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me to this good conference. As you may know, I'm kind of last minute addition to the program. So actually, I'm spending this month and next month in London and King's College during my sabbatical. So when I let John know that he invited me to this one, so I'm very happy here. Then I realized I'm the only one without tie today. So coming from California, please forgive me on that. So also I'd like to be a little more blunt in my questions. I know they are recording, but let me ask two questions and also maybe one big question for all of us. One is going back to Japan-ROK relations. I think going back to last maybe 10 years, the worst time is during Abe and Moon Jae-in, right? I mean, that's only like, 5 years ago? So it's really worst time. And then Kishida, Yoon Suk-yeol, probably the best time. And right now, I think it's okay. I mean, between Ishiba and Lee Jae-myung. But as you point out, now we may entering a new period, especially with the leadership change in Japan. I mean, you mentioned that political foundation may be quite fragile in LDP and so on. So, what to expect? I mean, are we going back to more like Abe, Moon Jae-in, or Kishida, Yoon Suk-yeol, or somewhere between? I'd like to actually little push you toward that question. And then, what needs to be done to maintain good bilateral relations between Tokyo and Seoul? So let me share one episode. 2 years ago, during APEC meetings in San Francisco, we hosted actually Kishida and Yoon Suk-yeol to our campus. So that's the maybe only time that any university was inviting two leaders. So I think what happened was that idea initially came from Tokyo, and they were asking us. Actually, our center was hosting, so whether we can host two leaders. The sense was I think Tokyo was somewhat felt a little indebted to Yoon, that took the encourage to initiate bilateral relationship. So I conveyed the idea to Seoul, and then Seoul was very receptive, but they want to make sure that it's serious. I mean, Tokyo is serious, and it's coming from Tokyo. So we went back to Tokyo saying, "Are you serious?" Then they say yes, and then Seoul accepted actually. So I think that's what happened. And then at the summit, they didn't talk about geopolitics. It's about technology, collaboration, AI, and innovation. So I think there are many other topics that the country can talk about besides security issues. And actually, we were able to convince them coming without tie, actually. So if you look at the photo, neither Yoon nor Kishida wear tie, actually. That's why I'm not wearing tie today. So I think, the reason I'm sharing this episode is that there's a lot of, at least at the time, a lot of respect, recognition, and trust, actually. So I think there's a really good time between Japan and ROK. So can you go really back to the era and what can be done? I mean, that's my first question. The second one, can three countries really collaborate on North Korea policy? I mean, we touched on this panel and the last panel. So I heard that now U.S. Embassy in Seoul is preparing a contingency plan in case that Trump and Kim Jong-un may meet. So you know the last formal summit happened in Hanoi in 2019, and then Kim Jong-un and Trump met briefly in Panmunjom. So I still personally believe it's not likely, but I wouldn't rule out possibility that they might meet briefly in Panmunjom or somewhere, just say hi. It may not be in a formal summit, but I think Kim Jong-un said that he has good memory of meeting with Trump, and actually after Hanoi, correct me, I think Pyongyang was more upset with Seoul than Washington actually. So I think Trump really wanted to resume the talks, and I think Kim Jong-un, I think eventually he will come to table, maybe not easily. So let's say, I think in the first panel, we talked about possibility of making some compromise, by Trump regarding North Korean nuclear issue, because during the first term, he was sort of, surrounded by professionals, but this time only loyalists. So if he wanted to do something, then I don't know who's going to really say no. So let's say Trump agree on some kind of reduction in nuclear, weapons, not complete denuclearization. And what will be a response from Seoul and Tokyo? I think maybe current Lee government may be more willing to consider positively, but I'm not sure Tokyo can really in the same way. So can three countries really collaborate on this North Korea policy? I'm a little skeptical side, but once again, I'd like to get your opinion about this question. Okay, now the big question. So, we talked about a lot of challenges. So now, where we are heading now? I mean, I think personally believe now post-Cold War era is ending, if not has ended. And some people saying that we are entering a new Cold War. I'm skeptical because, ironically, Cold War maintained some kind of stability because it's a very clear bifurcation between communist and capitalist or free world. And then there wasn't much internal division, maybe other than McCarthyism in the United States briefly. But now, a lot of internal turmoil. I mean, not only in United States, but South Korean domestic politics also, quite contested. Japan also going through, I think, some tough time as well. So, I think where are we heading? And also, I think you mentioned that Trump will be gone in 3.5 years, but Trumpism may not disappear, because in my view, Trump was not simply symptom or cause, maybe catalyst. And then even after Trump leaves office, I don't think Trumpism will disappear anytime soon. It's not impossible to see even worse leader in the United States. So I think this will persist for a while. I mean, that's my view. That's why I like you to challenge my view. It's a question in my view. So what's going to happen? So I mean, here may be some historian on Europe. So I know some people may say we may entering almost like 1930s. Okay, so ironically, once again, Cold War maintained some stability, but now I don't see any clear order. I mean, I don't know who's the enemy, who's the friends. I was talking to one senior U.S. officer. He's saying that what Trump is trying to do is to, correct him. He's trying to press allies, friends, and trying to be friendly with enemies. So there's no clear cut, friends and enemy in this world. And then, for Trump, maybe he's more targeting, quote unquote, internal enemy, okay, than external enemies. So, in my view, we are entering fairly chaotic in a regional order. So, what's going to happen, within the next, let's say, next 5 years? So, trilateralism may be part of this big order. So, unless we think about this big regional or global order, I don't think we can properly understand trilateralism among three countries. So, I try to be more provocative and blunt, so I'd like to get your opinions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiwok. Indeed, very provocative questions. And, I'm guessing you're addressing those to all of the panelists. Okay, so we're going to make a little bit of time. So we've got about half an hour left, I think, or so on this session. So we'll make a bit of time for our three speakers to respond to some of your provocative, very, very, very big questions. But I guess the first one is about where is this trilateral relationship going? How can we best steer it? How can we best manage that? Second one, can they really cooperate on North Korea? And then thirdly, the mega question. This is a big question. It's a huge question. I guess what's the future of the regional order, and where does trilateralism fit into that? I guess in terms of helping to maybe shape that order, and therefore thinking about the future prospects of trilateralism. So, a little bit of homework for our three panelists. I suggest we're going to go down the table again. Is that okay? Yeah. So, Kuyu? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Professor, for very provocative and actually each of those questions are pretty important topics, and many of experts and scholars are actually working on these questions in and out of South Korea. Actually, regarding your first questions, and especially relationship between South Korea and Japan, I guess it might be between two periods you mentioned, like Abe and Moon Jae-in on the one side, and the other side there's a Kishida Yoon. And the reason why I said it is in between is that, of course, Lee Jae-myung is a pretty progressive leader, but at the same time, the difference between Moon Jae-in and Lee Jae-myung is that he signaled his willingness to cooperate with Japan, even though his original attitude before election was more progressive oriented. But at the same time, after election, he signaled his willingness to maintain trilateral cooperations. And as Sheila mentions, he visited Japan before he moved to United States. So he has shown his willingness to, coordinate with Japan on many important issues. So I think that signaling was pretty important domestically as well, because during the progressive administration, we usually have that kind of sentiment in the domestic public opinion, but now we have more cooperative sentiment in the public opinion level as well. So I think that's why it could be in the between. But at the same time, when it comes to like a very critical strategic cooperations, like intel cooperation between Japan, or a military cooperation or operation at the trilateral level, might be more nuanced, I think, even though that has been developed far beyond that I expected, because before Trump administration or before Yoon administration, actually, I was asked by American colleague, can you imagine three countries can work on like a joint naval exercises? I said no, but after 3 years, it becomes yes. So there is a progress, even though it is very slow, but there is a progress. So I think Lee Jae-myung actually get the gist of that kind of insight. There will be a kind of more moderations than in the Moon Jae-in administration. And areas of cooperations, and usually people said that people usually focus on like a low-hanging fruit, like technological cooperation or people-to-people exchanges. But when it comes to Japan and South Korea relations, I think we have to focus more on the domestic politics or societal politics, because we kind of share similar patterns of industrial development or people-to-people or social developments, like aging issue as well. So, and also we have some panelists mentions younger generations actually have more favorable opinion to one another actually. than in the case of older generations. So when you look at those societal kind of segments which have more favorable opinion to another, focus on that kind of cooperations, then it might be much more longer lasting effect on trilateral cooperation in the end. So that's just one suggestion. And regarding North Korea-US relations, well, that's very tough questions. And
You don't have to attempt all the questions.
yes, okay. But yeah, South Korea's position is that we are going to serve as a pacemaker. That's kind of assumption that this U.S.-North Korea dialogue is pretty much depends on one another, not necessarily the role of South Korea. That's kind of assumption that this government actually has. So if something occurred, if two leaders actually meet in the Panmunjom or somewhere else, three countries might serve as a kind of pacemaker as well, provide more favorable environment. They can start the negotiations and dialogue in the first place. But at the same time, deterrence measures should be coordinated as well. And the last question, and I agree with Professor Shin that this period is pretty confusing and discouraging. And I always says that this period is not new Cold War. This is more like an interwar period in 1930s. It's like a more extreme ideological kind of mobilization in each of those countries. But at the same time, there is a global leadership from the top. So yeah, that's why I always says that it is important to maintain these like-minded countries, then their coalitions in the multilateral or multilateral level. But we will see. Even like-minded countries these days have more extreme ideology sometimes. So sustainability of those momentum might depend on domestic politics in the end. So I'll stop here.
Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Just a couple of thoughts about each. I think for the first one about where are we, I also agree that we're somewhere in the middle. This time, there's no ideological battle being fought about history and things between Japan and South Korea. But at the same time, there's no forward initiative. There's no momentum that's carrying things forward. And so my gut says we'll probably see trilateral cooperation moving forward on the margins, but it's not going to be a main centerpiece of initiatives. And what needs to be done, I do think, to maintain positive ties, there needs to be a focus on more practical elements like the technology, supply chains, human-to-human stuff. And the reason why is they need to build trust. They need more time to build trust. And as you have positive things that work out, it builds trust and it has this positive effect. For the second question about can we really cooperate on North Korea, in your question, you seem to focus a lot on the summit. If we're focusing just on a summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, then probably not. The reason I say that is, President Trump likes to do his own diplomacy. And so I can't imagine a situation where he would turn to trilateralism to try to get the input on contents or agendas. That just seems, it would be out of the style. And so I think it would be a leadership decision coming out of the White House. I don't think trilateralism would play a role in that. But I do think that we need to look beyond a summit, because implementation of any agreement is going to require all three countries. And there's a lot of fine, nuanced points that diplomats are great at working out. And so you're also going to need South Korean, Japanese, and American resources. You're going to need their buy-in. There's going to be a lot of things there that I think trilateralism could be vital for any sort of agreement to be worked out at the leadership level. And then finally, the big IR theory question that you asked about where we're heading. I think it's a great question. I tend, in my sort of 2 minutes of thinking up here, I jotted down here. I think we're heading towards a period of multipolarity with different centers of geopolitical gravity, as well as different comparative advantages and levers of national power. and these don't always align with one another. So you can have, you'll have military power in one country, maybe you have economic power, technological power, soft power. You have countries that have comparative advantage in different aspects. Because they don't always align, I do think minilaterals are critical, because minilaterals offer countries an ad hoc approach to deal with problems as they arise. And because of this growing multipolarity, I think it will provide minilaterals like the trilat, provide countries with an opportunity to pool their resources in what they're good at against a common concern that they have that allows them to deal with it. It's not easy, but an ad hoc minilateral is a lot easier than a formal organization that has a secretariat that has to file different, papers and get agreement from all the buy-in. Trilats or any sort of mini-lat is just a lot easier to do to deal with problems.
Well, thank you very much for great questions. Let me respond to these questions in this way. First question relates to the individuals, political leaders. Individual political leaders matter, of course, but at the same time, I have a feeling that strategic environment and institutionalization also matter. And the strategic environment today is severer than a decade ago. So both ROK and Japanese government face much more difficult international agendas, difficulties. In this way, I think that the feeling of the necessity actually gather two countries together. So in this way, I think this continues. That's why at the end of my talk, I mentioned that I am more or less optimistic about the future of trilateral cooperation. At the same time, during the Kishida-Yoon period and the Kishida-Lee period, as I mentioned, that the best time. But at the same time, I had the sense that during the period, many Japanese and Korean bureaucrats understood that the time has come when a new political leader would come in office. And for that purpose, even regardless of the change of the political leaders, they actually created the kind of institutionalization, of course, to some extent, of that trilateral cooperation. Like it is said that every year, 3 leaders should meet. But in the second year, they didn't meet, actually. So even during that period, they didn't fulfill that agreement and the spirit. So in that way, I think that regardless of the turbulence, but the ground for the trilateral cooperation was created while predicting that the time has come when a much more hostile, antagonistic, nationalistic leader would come to the office. And at the same time, I think that, regarding with cooperation in the field of North Korean policy, I think that it is a quite difficult question to be answered because, number one, we don't know yet the basic policy stance of President Trump toward this issue. Because, of course, both Japan and ROK are lesser powers. As long as United States has not basically defined its own basic stance toward the issue, maybe both countries, Japan and ROK, cannot decide and fix basic stance to that. And we predict the fluctuation of the policy of the United States toward the issue as well. In this way, I think that the two countries need to follow the fluctuating basic stance of the United States toward the policy, as we experienced in the first Trump administration. But at the same time, that is why, regardless of the fluctuation of the U.S. foreign policy, I think that both countries, Japan and ROK, now need, much more than before, bilateral stronger cooperation in facing these issues. But as I mentioned, I'm optimistic because last month there was a trilateral foreign ministers meeting, and the wording are very strong in the field of North Korean policy as well. So even under the President Trump's administration, I think that the three governments fully aware of the necessity of coordinating their difference in responding to challenges or larger challenges that North Korean government is now posing.
So I'd like to make 2 points. One is I believe that Trump thinks he knows Kim Jong-un or North Korea better than Korean or Japanese leaders or his own staff. I think that's a danger because he's been through already, and so he thinks he knows the best, so therefore he's the best person to deal with. I think that's a danger I kind of suspect. The other one, because I'm in UK, you hear many students in Cambridge. Going back to World War II, it was UK, United States, who were able to defend liberal democracy from fascism and communism. Can they do again? I mean, that's a question that I think you guys should think about very, very seriously, because I really feel that we may entering a very challenging time. And I don't see any leader. I mean, not US, I don't know, maybe not UK. Now, Russia, China, they are increasing their influence. I mean, that kind of worries me. I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I think for young people, I really want you to think about very carefully about our future. So, anyway, yeah.
Thank you. So thanks to everyone, because you've kept really well to time and responding. So we've now got about 15 minutes or so, a bit longer, John, I don't know. 20 minutes. John's going to give us 20 minutes for. We should start a little bit late after lunch. I should be okay. I might have to run quite quickly, but I'll be okay. So we've got an opportunity now to open it up to the floor for questions and some answers. So I propose that maybe I can put your hands up and let's take sort of bunches of threes perhaps, and then we'll go for another round. So I've got I think at the very back I had a gentleman in the red shirt there.
So my question is really about the idea of minilaterals or some sort of loose association of countries. And the concern I have is, what really can these things deliver, considering that you've got a hegemonic or a power aspiring to hegemony in this area, and we've seen that the Second World War kicked off with a bunch of localized invasions of regional countries like Czechoslovakia, where minilateral kind of defense agreements were not sufficient to unify the resisting powers. So on the other point is that if we've got a US that's becoming increasingly more fascist and on the verge of civil breakdown and potential civil war, surely it's time for a much stronger alliance system between Korea, Japan, maybe even Taiwan or other regional powers. And surely that's the only thing that has a chance of deterring a country like China, which has already regional supremacy in the Navy, even against the US. But obviously I'm not an expert, and I'd like to hear what can minilaterals achieve, what have they achieved, and what would this look like more than just a memorandum of understanding kind of situation?
Thanks, thank you. I'm going to get some additional questions. Is that addressed to anybody in particular, or just anybody on the panel wants to have a go at that? I think. Okay, then I think we had a question here. Yes, please.
It was mentioned previously that Trump might focus on internal threats. As all three countries are democracies and with more polarized political thinking, how much of a role will public opinion in each country affect trilateralism going forward, especially with social media discourse being so key to aspects like things like approval ratings?
Great, thank you. And then I think the third question, just here. Thank you. And then we'll come for some more later.
Thank you very much for the insightful discussion. Takahiro Kami from WWS. I think a question to Dr. Jeffrey. on the kind of trilateral. I think as the cooperation, I think as you point out, that kind of difficulties of trilateral cooperation on, especially say, for instance, issues in Taiwan or South China Sea. South Korea might be not really active in engaging in like maritime cooperation with Japan or US, where US, Japan bilaterally really doing more like capacity building things for Southeast Asian Coast Guard, for instance. But I think last month the US and Republic of Korea and Japan had this kind of statement on trilateral cooperation. I think last month they had a kind of statement for a meeting. And then they mentioned that they kind of accelerate maritime cooperation on the South China Sea. And then what I can realize, like South Korea is actually quite active for weapon supply and defense supply to Coast Guard country in South China Sea, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, whereas Japan has been more focused on capacity building activities towards Coast Guard country. And I just want to ask, is that might be too pessimistic about how we can actually coordinate different strengths of different countries in which like South Korea has more experience on like supply of defense capacity to those countries, whereas Japan and US have might be a different strength. So I just want to hear your opinion, how you see this kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got three. I'll come back for if the panelists can be quick in responding, then I'll come back for some more questions. So that's a bit of incentive. So Jeffrey, you've got one specific question to you. I'll let you deal with that one, and then we've got two other questions. So I don't know if anybody wants to try both those questions or one of those questions. You can pick whatever you like. So maybe Yuichi, do you want to go first this time?
Thank you very much. I like to pick up unilateralism question because this is quite important one today because it seems to be that current Trump administration has been quite hostile to the multilateralism, such as United Nations, WTO, and so on. That's why I think that multilateralism matters more than before. And it seems that President Trump seems to be favoring this sort of multilateral cooperation, such as Quad and US-Japan, ROK, trilateralism, and so on. But Quad is facing difficulty due largely to the much more tensed US-India relations. So those multilateral cooperation is very much easily influenced and affected by those domestic political foreign policy of any one country. So in that way, now we are not able to rely either those multilateral cooperation nor multilateral cooperation in that way. In addition to these, we need bilateral cooperation like a US-Japan cooperation, ROK-Japan cooperation, and so on. So at this moment, I think that seeing the weakness of the existing institutions, particularly multilateral institutions, what we can do is combining all of them, combining all of these frameworks to strengthen our own foreign policy.
Yeah, I'll take the one question. I have a quick comment too on the mini-lash, but with the trilat, I think your comment about sort of where there's some strengths, that's exactly getting to the point that I was mentioning about pulling the levers of comparative advantages. Japan does not have a robust defense export history. But what they do have is the capacity building. For instance, helping the armed forces of the Philippines learn how to load C-130s in a manner that their cargo doesn't get messed around when the plane takes off. The more that our countries can coordinate these efforts, it is to the larger collective benefit for countries that are trying to push back on Chinese activities or Chinese influence. It also helps them have better visibility on just activity that's happening. And so I do think there is, that is a role that gets us out in some ways of, it's trilateralism, but it's not trilateralism. What I mean by that, it's not that the US, Japan, and Korea are all going and doing all this together, but they're coordinating. with their own unilateral efforts in the region with their specific partners, and the collective benefit is good for them. Just a quick comment on the minilateral question. I totally agree with Hosoya-san about minilaterals do matter more than before. They deliver a lot. I think I remember when Quad came out and people were saying this isn't Asian NATO or this isn't a NATO. Never was intending to be a NATO. And I think sometimes we try to overemphasize the value of something when it was not intended for that purpose to begin with. There are minilaterals that you have economic minilaterals, you have diplomatic minilaterals. I would say the Quad is kind of like a diplomatic minilateral. You have technological focused one. AUKUS is a good example there. You have security ones. You could say some of the things that we see with U.S., Japan, Australia is a security focus. So you have different types of minilaterals that serve different purposes. Because of the fact that countries seem either less willing or frustrated to use formal organizations more than they have in the past, minilaterals become a good ad hoc way for countries to pursue their national interests, do it in a way that's quicker and more effective and efficient than has been in the past. So I completely agree with Soy-san.
Yes, I agree with both of you when it comes to minilateral. I'll take the second and third questions. When it comes to public opinions, and I think it's pretty important to sustain a kind of coherent, not necessarily coherent, but kind of consistent public opinion regarding trilateral cooperations, because as all of our panelists mentioned, trilateral cooperation has a specific interest and specific threats. That threat perception or interest should be sustained so that trilateral cooperation can be sustained in the future. That can be fluctuated by public opinions, and especially more so because of more populist sentiments are growing in 3 of these countries. So in that sense, maintaining public opinion consistent is pretty important. It is not just a volatile kind of factor, but it is very important. And I think in South Korea and Japan, as we observe more authoritarian alignment between Russia, China, and North Korea, then we have more higher kind of approval for the trilateral cooperation these days, especially South Korea. We used to have more diverse, divisive kind of distribution of public opinion about China, but now we have very consistent support for the trilateral cooperation. So I think that's kind of one thing that serve as a constraint which governments actually take the office to sustain this trilateral cooperation.
Thank you. Okay, we are running short on time, but we've got probably time for one more round of questions, kind of last orders for questions. So what I'll do is we'll take a bunch, and then we'll give a little bit of time to respond to as many as they can. But then when we run out of time, we're out of time. So a question there. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is
Please,
Jan.
please keep the questions quite short if we can.
Yes, my question is to Professor Yuichi Hosoya. You told about the weak political foundations of the LDP in terms of the trilateral and international relations. But since we observing right now that the politics in Japan becomes more diverse with today's news, for example, do you think that Japanese political foundation in overall, not just LDP, is mature enough for the further trilateral development within few parties being in the parliament? Thank you.
Great, thanks. Next question is on there, please. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want the microphone? I think it's coming on you. It's on its way. Yeah, thank you.
Obviously, it seems U.S. is the gluing part between Japan and Korea. And if, obviously, U.S. wants to act more than being glue, it needs resources, it needs contribution. If it forces Japan and Korea to contribute more resources, and they refuse and U.S. withdraw from there, do you think those 2 countries go as a threshold nuclear, will go nuclear or not?
Thank you. Yeah, over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Also for Professor Hosoya, in the event Takaishi doesn't become prime minister and we do get a opposition coalition in power, what do you think an opposition foreign policy would look like? Would it be similar to what it was like in 2009, 2012? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Still a bit more time. Anybody else? Yeah, right at the back there. Oh. Yeah.
Hi. Sorry, I'll stand up. I'm quite far back. My name is Syra. Thank you for your talk. I'm interested to hear whether you think institutionalized trilateral mechanisms can actually overcome, realistically, historical grievances and domestic political instability. And if so, what do those mechanisms look like? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I don't see any more hands. Okay, very last one then, I think, right at the back there.
Hello, I'm Moses. I'm a student from University of Sheffield. I would like to ask for the future of trilateral cooperation. So recently China have a lot of military activities in the Taiwan Strait and the nuclear threat in North Korea. Is there any potential for creating a much more formal alliance like an Asian NATO in those trilateral cooperation?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes. Sorry? Oh, it's a sneeze. Sorry, strategic sneeze. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. There was a couple of specific questions to Hosoya Sensei, and then I think the rest were questions where anybody can have a go at them. So I'm going to give you like a minute or two each maximum.
About the nuclear.
You go for whichever you pick, whichever you
Well,
can.
nuclear, armament of South Korea, and there existed that public opinion for a long time. It is not just about trilateral, but the preference, South Korean public's preference to develop its own nuclear weapon has been sustained since like Cold War. So it is nothing new, but as North Korea develop nuclear weapon and the level of technology become more sophisticated, it gets higher. So you have to understand the trend of public opinion like that way. But if kind of trilateral fall down, but I don't think that will affect South Korea's preference for nuclear armaments, but rather whether the United States has a willingness to keep the commitment to extended deterrence in the first place. That is the kind of trigger for South Korean public to prefer more nuclear armaments, because extended deterrence is, by definitions, it is kind of a commitment of between two countries. But the thing is that it is a Trump administration. Even during the Biden administration, we have very uncertainty about whether the United States can deliver its promise and to provide nuclear extended deterrence. But even more uncertain, Trump administration has raised more questions about whether the United States can keep the commitment extended deterrence. So that is the factor that actually raised the issue of nuclear armaments, and I think there will be more that kind of public opinion for the next 4 years during the Trump administration term, I think.
Yeah, I'll just take the last two questions because I think Hosoya-san is going to be tackling the first ones. But the first one about the more formal alliance structure being possible, I'm bullish on this. I don't think it is. Part of the reason when Prime Minister Ishiba came out with Asian NATO and people sort of laughed that off was, just the notion of Japan defending Korea or Korea defending Japan. It doesn't seem like something realistic in our lifetimes that they would commit themselves when we're at a situation today where Japanese self-defense forces can't even go on the peninsula like I was talking about. And there's not even an acquisition cross-servicing agreement between these countries. So to get to the point where they would commit their blood and treasure to each other, I just don't see that as a realistic in any of the lifetimes in this room right now. The second question, and then I'll give it to Hosoya-san, is that institutional trilateralism and whether that can help overcome issues. Yes and no. I guess I'm more skeptical about it doing that. I think when the Biden administration was pushing trilateralism, we heard a lot from the Biden administration how this is going to help institutionalize the relationship. But people who are not in the Democrats' side were pointing fingers saying, you're putting a lot of hope on this institutionalization, but once you're out of power, nothing locks this in. This is at the whims of the political leader, and that's exactly what we've seen. I do think that the more we can have positive momentum and actual things happening, it helps build trust. It helps provide important precedents that can be used moving forward. But I think it doesn't overcome past issues. civil society and anger and thoughts about historical issues, territorial disputes between the countries. Like, there's a lot of things that can still push things off track quickly in unexpected ways if a leader decides to play a history card or run with, just run with something. And so I don't think institutionalization of trilateralism will ever be able to overcome past things. I think it's always at the whims of a political leader.
Right. Thank you very much. LDP question. It's perhaps natural to say that one party or one coalition continuingly, eternally dominating Japan is not at all a healthy thing. So that's why I think that I support that more political parties are able and willing to run and rule the country. So in that way, I think it is quite healthy to see that more parties are trying to create a coalition by replacing the current coalition LDP government. And in addition to that, relating to this question, opposition parties' foreign policy course, I like to say that currently a major opposition party have quite rational, balanced leader in it. So in that way, unlike before, we have much more centrist political parties than before, even though there are some right-wing, left-wing parties, extreme ones. But at the same time, I think that more and more Japanese politics is becoming difficult to describe, but maybe matured. So in that way, we need to have a regular, maybe a swing of government or the change of government with reliable, rational, centrist political parties. But I'm not quite sure if it continues. But at this moment, I can see that opposition parties would be capable enough to run the government as long as they can coordinate differences in foreign policy course. And a nuclear weapons one, I will finish with this. I think that there are two factors that would define and decide the Japanese course on nuclearization. Number one, as is already mentioned, further, United States is willing to continue to maintain the current extended deterrence. And it is written in the recent joint statement among the three countries. It is written that the United States reiterated its ironclad commitments to the defense of Japan and ROK, backed by America's unmatched military strengths. And they also mentioned on the importance of maintaining and reaffirming its extended deterrence. That's why, as long as we can see it, I don't think that Japan is going to nuclear. Number two factor is Korea. If Korea decides to have a nuclear weapons, I think that the more Japanese people would be willing to follow the same course.
We're out of time. Yeah. I'm sorry to be so brutal, but we're going to have to, like Kim Jong-un or someone. But we're out of time, so we will. I know, G, you would have some great comments as well to add. So sorry if not to call on you, but fantastic comments, fantastic questions and answers, great panel. We have to wrap up because of time, but well done, everyone. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just say thank you. That was a really fascinating panel. I know, Chris, you have to get your train. So I'm just going to say a few words, which is, in a way, I think this panel was probably the most challenging one, as we discovered that, predicting the future is always a tricky business. And when it comes to some of the things we've been discussing, the phenomenon of Donald Trump himself and winning that second election, change in Japanese politics and the emergence of potentially a non-LDP prime minister. I think it's a reminder that we really have to look very hard at our core assumptions about what generates change. And I think this panel and the previous one both laid out to us, I think, a number of different factors to consider. But for me, the big takeaway is that we've got a range of different views from a group of like-minded individuals, which is striking. I heard optimistic, cautiously concerned, and pessimistic to describe the scenarios for the future that we were briefly discussing today. But I think a common recognition, however, also that Donald Trump has been a big catalyst for change. Whether that change is positive or negative is hard to say. But we will continue to look at this issue with great interest. So let me finish by thanking the panelists, both this panel and the previous one, and to thank you, the audience, for coming along and asking your questions. Thank you very much.